I was sorting through junk mail when the envelope arrived. It looked official. Hospital logo in the corner. My name and address printed cleanly across the front. I almost threw it away. I'd been getting collection notices for months, medical bills from the final weeks before the accident, statements I couldn't bring myself to open. But this one felt different, heavier somehow. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a medical billing summary, date of service 3 weeks ago, patient name Ethan Pierce. My son's name, my dead son's name. I set it down on the kitchen table and stared at it. Ethan had died 16 months ago. A car accident on Highway 36. Just after midnight, coming home from a friend's house. The police said he'd lost control on a curve. The car had gone off the road, hit a tree. He was 22 years old. We buried him on a Tuesday. Gray sky, light rain, the kind of weather that makes everything feel heavier than it is. My ex-wife stood on the other side of the grave. We hadn't spoken in 3 years, not since the divorce was finalized. But we both stood there, watching them lower the casket into the ground, and neither of us said a word. I went back to work 2 weeks later. I taught history at the community college, the same classes I'd been teaching for 15 years. I kept my head down. I graded papers. I showed up. People stopped asking how I was doing after a while, which was a relief. And now, 16 months later, there was a billing statement with my son's name on it. I read it again. The date was clear. The hospital was St. Catherine's, about 40 minutes away. The charge was for an emergency room visit. Observation and discharge. No procedures, no surgery. Just an ER visit 3 weeks ago. I called the hospital. The woman who answered transferred me to billing. I waited on hold, listening to soft jazz, trying to steady my breathing. When someone picked up, I explained as calmly as I could. There's been a mistake. I received a bill for my son, but he passed away over a year ago. This has to be an error. The billing clerk was apologetic, professional. She asked for the patient's date of birth. I gave it to her. She typed for a while, then went quiet. I'm showing an ER visit on September 8th, she said. Patient was checked in at 11:40 p.m. and discharged at 2:15 a.m. That's impossible, I said. I understand this is confusing, Mr. Pierce. But the records show. My son is dead. She was quiet for a moment. I'm very sorry for your loss, but I'm looking at an active record. It's possible someone used his information. Identity theft happens especially with... No, I said. No, that doesn't make sense. Would you like me to transfer you to our medical records department? They can investigate this further. I said yes. The medical records office took my information and said they'd look into it. They told me it might take a few days. I thanked them and hung up. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time after that, staring at the bill. Ethan had been my only child. His mother and I had him young, too young probably, and we'd done our best. It hadn't been enough to keep the marriage together, but we'd both loved him. That much was never in question. After the divorce, Ethan stayed with his mother most of the time. I saw him on weekends during school breaks. We were close, or I thought we were. He was quiet like me, careful with his words. He studied biology at the state university, talked about maybe going into research. He had a girlfriend I'd met once, a roommate I'd never met. He called me every few weeks, usually on Sunday afternoons. We'd talk for 20 minutes, sometimes less. It was enough. And then he was gone. The funeral had been small. His mother arranged it. She didn't ask for my input, and I didn't offer. A few of his college friends came. His girlfriend sat in the front row and cried the entire time. I remember thinking I should comfort her, but I didn't know how. Afterward, his mother and I stood in the parking lot of the funeral home. She told me she was moving to Colorado. Her sister lived there. She needed to be somewhere else, she said. Somewhere that didn't remind her. I nodded. I understood. I asked if there was anything of Ethan's she wanted me to have. She said no. She was keeping everything. I didn't argue. Now, 16 months later, I was holding a piece of paper that said my son had been in an emergency room 3 weeks ago. The medical records office called back 2 days later. The woman on the phone identified herself as Patricia Nguyen, records coordinator. She sounded tired, like she'd had a long day, and this was just one more thing to deal with. Mr. Pierce, I've reviewed the file you asked about. I can confirm that a patient with your son's name and date of birth was treated in our ER on September 8th. But my son is deceased. I understand. That's why I'm calling. We ran a comparison with our system records, and there's no death certificate on file for Ethan Pierce. According to our database, he's still listed as an active patient. There has to be a death certificate. He died in March of last year. I believe you, Mr. Pierce, but it's not in our system. And without it, we can't flag the record as fraudulent or close the account. So what do I do? You'll need to provide a copy of the death certificate to our office. Once we have that, we can investigate further and determine if this was identity theft or a clerical error. I don't have a copy. You can request one from the county clerk's office where the death was registered. They should be able to provide it within a few days. I thanked her and hung up. I drove to the county clerk's office that afternoon. It was in the basement of the courthouse, a windowless room with fluorescent lighting and rows of filing cabinets. A young man behind the counter helped me. I filled out a form, paid $12, and waited. He came back 10 minutes later. I'm not finding a record, he said. What do you mean? There's no death certificate on file for Ethan Pierce. Are you sure he died in this county? Yes. The accident was on Highway 36, just outside of Millbrook. The funeral home was here. Let me check again. He went back to his computer, typed for a while, then shook his head. I'm sorry. There's nothing here. That's not possible. He looked uncomfortable. Sometimes there are delays in filing, especially if there's an investigation or an autopsy. But it's been over a year. If it's not here by now, something's wrong. Who would I talk to about that? You could try the medical examiner's office. They handle autopsies and death certifications. If they were involved, they'd have a record. I drove to the medical examiner's office. It was in a squat gray building on the edge of town, next to the county hospital. I waited in a small lobby until a woman in scrubs called me back. I explained the situation. She listened, then pulled up Ethan's name in her system. We don't have a record of an autopsy for Ethan Pierce, she said. Are you sure one was performed? I don't know. I assumed. Who handled the funeral arrangements? His mother. She would have received the death certificate. You should contact her. I thanked her and left. I sat in my car in the parking lot, hands on the steering wheel, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. No death certificate, no autopsy record, a hospital bill from 3 weeks ago. I hadn't spoken to my ex-wife in 16 months. Not since the funeral. I didn't have her new address in Colorado. I didn't have her phone number anymore. She'd changed it after the move. But I had her sister's number, saved in my phone from years ago. I called. Her sister answered on the third ring. She sounded surprised to hear from me. Is everything okay? She asked. I need to talk to Rachel. It's important. She's not here right now. Can I have her call you back? Yes, please. It's about Ethan. There was a pause. What about Ethan? I just need to talk to her. Okay, I'll have her call you. Rachel called me that night. Her voice was tight, guarded. What do you want? I need to ask you something. About Ethan? I don't want to talk about this. Rachel, I need a copy of his death certificate. She was quiet for a moment. Why? I'm trying to resolve some paperwork. Medical bills. But I can't find a record of the certificate. Do you have a copy? No. Did the funeral home give you one? I don't remember. Rachel, this is important. I said I don't want to talk about this. Something's wrong. I went to the county clerk, and they don't have a record. The medical examiner doesn't have one either. And I got a hospital bill last week with Ethan's name on it, dated 3 weeks ago. The line went silent. Rachel, that's impossible. I know. That's why I'm asking. She didn't say anything for a long time. Then, quietly, I have to go. Wait. She hung up. I tried calling back. She didn't answer. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about the phone call. The way her voice had changed when I mentioned the hospital bill. She'd sounded scared. The next morning, I called the police department that had handled the accident report. I asked to speak to someone about the crash from March of the previous year. They transferred me to a records clerk. I gave her the date, the location, Ethan's name. She came back a few minutes later. I'm not finding an accident report for that date and location. Are you sure? Yes. There's nothing here. Could it have been filed under a different date? I searched the whole week. There's no report matching that description. I thanked her and hung up. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the wall. No death certificate. No autopsy. No accident report. A hospital bill from 3 weeks ago. I thought about the funeral, the casket, the grave. I thought about Rachel, standing on the other side of the grave, not looking at me. I thought about the fact that I'd never actually seen Ethan's body. The casket had been closed. Rachel had insisted on it. She said the accident had been too severe, that it was better to remember him the way he was. I hadn't argued. I'd assumed she was right. But now I wondered. I called the funeral home. The director remembered me. His voice was somber, sympathetic. What can I do for you, Mr. Pierce? I need to ask about Ethan's service. The one in March of last year. Of course. Who signed the paperwork? Who made the arrangements? Your ex-wife did. She handled everything. Did you see the body? He hesitated. I'm sorry. Ethan's body. Did you personally see it? Or Mr. Pierce? I'm not sure I understand what you're asking. I'm asking if you saw my son's body. If you prepared it. If you put it in the casket. There was a long pause. Mr. Pierce, we don't typically embalm when the family requests a closed casket and immediate burial. In your son's case, the body was delivered from the hospital morgue, and we transferred it directly to the casket per your ex-wife's instructions. So you didn't see it. The casket was sealed when it arrived. I felt something cold settle in my chest. The casket was already sealed. Yes. That's not unusual when the family prefers a closed casket. Where did it come from? I'd have to check our records, but I believe it was arranged through the hospital. Which hospital? I'll need to pull the file. Can you hold? I waited. My hands were shaking. He came back a few minutes later. The transfer was arranged through St. Catherine's Hospital, the same hospital that had billed me for an ER visit 3 weeks ago. Thank you, I said. I hung up and sat very still. I didn't know what I was thinking. I couldn't let myself think it. But the pieces were there, scattered across my kitchen table, refusing to fit together in any way that made sense except for one. I called St. Catherine's Hospital and asked to speak to someone in administration. I was transferred 3 times before I reached someone who would listen. Her name was Linda Marsh, Patient Services Administrator. I explained everything as calmly as I could. The bill, the missing death certificate, the funeral home statement, the sealed casket. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Mr. Pierce, what you're describing is very serious. If there was any kind of irregularity in the handling of a deceased patient, that's something we need to investigate immediately. Can you check your records? From March of last year, I can. But I'll need to involve our legal and compliance team. This may take some time. I understand. Can you come in tomorrow? I'd like to speak with you in person. I agreed. The next day I drove to St. Catherine's Hospital. Linda Marsh met me in a small conference room on the 2nd floor. She was in her 50s, gray hair pulled back, reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She had a file in front of her. Thank you for coming in, she said. I've been reviewing our records, and I need to ask you some questions. I nodded. In March of last year, was your son admitted to this hospital? I don't know. I was told he died at the scene of the accident. Our records show an admission on March 14th. Trauma, emergency department. He was treated for injuries sustained in a motor vehicle accident and admitted to the ICU. I stared at her. He was alive. According to this file, yes. He was in critical condition but stabilized overnight. The next morning, he was transferred to another facility. What facility? She looked down at the file. It says Clearwater Rehabilitation Center. About an hour north of here. I was never told any of this. Who was listed as his next of kin? I don't know. She turned the file toward me. According to our intake form, the primary contact was Rachel Pierce, your ex-wife. She told me he was dead, Linda Marsh looked at me for a long moment. Mr. Pierce, I think we need to contact the authorities. The investigation took 3 weeks. The hospital's compliance team worked with the county prosecutor's office to review the records. They found that Rachel had been listed as Ethan's primary emergency contact and had full medical power of attorney, something she'd arranged years earlier when he was still a minor and never updated. When Ethan was admitted to St. Catherine's after the accident, he'd been unconscious. Rachel had arrived within the hour. She'd been given updates on his condition, signed consent forms for treatment, and made all medical decisions. The day after he was stabilized, she'd arranged for his transfer to Clearwater Rehabilitation Center, a private facility that specialized in long-term care for patients with severe brain injuries. She'd paid for it out of pocket, using money from a joint account she'd held with Ethan. And she'd told everyone, me, the funeral home, anyone who asked, that he had died. The prosecutor called me in for an interview. She was a woman in her 40s, efficient and direct. She asked me what I knew, what I'd been told, what I'd believed. I told her everything. She took notes, nodded occasionally, and when I finished, she said, "Your ex-wife falsified documents. She arranged a fake funeral. She's been keeping your son at a private facility for over a year, and you were never informed." Why would she do that? I can't speculate. But we're going to find out. They arrested Rachel 2 days later. Fraud, falsifying records, unlawful detention. The charges were complicated, but the core of it was clear. She'd lied to everyone and hidden Ethan away. I didn't go to the arraignment. I couldn't. I was too numb. Instead, I drove to Clearwater Rehabilitation Center. It was a low brick building surrounded by trees, quiet and isolated. I signed in at the front desk, showed my ID, and waited. A nurse came out to meet me. She was kind, careful with her words. She explained that Ethan had been a patient there for 16 months. He'd suffered a severe traumatic brain injury in the accident. He'd been in a coma for the first 3 months, then gradually emerged into a state of minimal consciousness. He couldn't speak, couldn't move much, but he was alive. "Can I see him?" I asked. She nodded. She led me down a long hallway to a private room. The door was open. Ethan was lying in a bed by the window. The afternoon light was soft, filtering through the blinds. He looked thin, pale, older than I remembered. There were tubes and monitors, the quiet beep of machines. I stood in the doorway and couldn't move. The nurse touched my arm gently. "Take your time." I walked over to the bed. His eyes were open, but they didn't track. He wasn't looking at anything. His hands rested on the blanket, still and pale. I pulled a chair over and sat down beside him. "Ethan," I said quietly. "It's me. It's Dad." He didn't respond. I sat there for a long time, just watching him breathe. The trial took 8 months. Rachel pleaded not guilty, claiming she'd acted in Ethan's best interest, that she'd been protecting him from a system that would have given up on him. Her lawyer argued that she'd paid for his care, visited him regularly, and done everything a mother could do. The prosecutor argued that she'd committed fraud, stolen his autonomy, and deprived me of the right to know my son was alive. The jury found her guilty on all counts. She was sentenced to 3 years in prison with credit for time served. I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt tired. Ethan was transferred to a different facility, one closer to where I lived. The doctors said his prognosis was uncertain. He might improve, or he might stay the same. There was no way to know. I visit him 3 times a week. I sit beside his bed and talk to him. I tell him about my day, about the students in my classes, about the weather. I don't know if he hears me, but I talk anyway. Some days I think I see something in his eyes. A flicker, a hint of recognition. Other days there's nothing. I've accepted that this is what we have now. This quiet room, this slow breathing, this presence that's both my son and not my son. Rachel writes to me from prison sometimes. Short letters, awkward and apologetic. She says she was scared, that she didn't know what else to do, that she thought I wouldn't understand. I don't write back. I don't know if I'll ever forgive her. I don't know if forgiveness even matters. What matters is that I'm here, that I know the truth, that I'm sitting beside my son, holding space for whatever he is now, whatever he might become. If you've ever discovered that the person you trusted most rewrote your reality without asking, and then had to rebuild it piece by piece in the quiet spaces they left behind, you're not alone. The truth doesn't always come quickly, but when it comes through the people who refuse to stop looking.